At this point, I am almost 100% certain that I know who the Zodiac Killer is. Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be all about the Zodiac Killer. This is obviously one of the most notorious serial killers of all time. So there's a lot of information and speculation about who the Zodiac Killer actually is, but the case remains unsolved to this day. Though I could say with like 100% certainty that I know who the Zodiac Killer is, honestly. But we'll get into that. Also, first, the reason I'm going to see the Wicked movie after I film this. Okay, so I'm dressed as Glinda. Duh. Anyway, so to break down this case, we're gonna go through the timelines of the actual killings, the notes, all of it. I'm sure you guys have probably heard of this case before. And then we're going to talk about potential suspects who I think did it. And also we're going to talk about a specific Netflix documentary that recently came out last month that I think was super interesting in regards to this case. So let's just get into it. All right, so the first known victims of the Zodiac Killer are two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16 years old, and David Faraday, who was 17. The two of them were parked on Lover's Lane, which is just basically a place where kids would go park their cars and hook up. I just feel like, I don't know. Is that a thing anymore? I feel like people don't do that anymore, but it was a thing in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, and this happened on Lake Herman Road near Vallejo, California. So Betty and David were hanging out in the car when someone approached them and shot at them through the car. When Betty Lou and David's bodies were found, it was obviously a shock to the community, but nobody at the time believed it to be the work of a serial killer. A lot of people thought this was going to be an isolated incident that was obviously very tragic, but the Vallejo area just had no clue what it was about to be in store for. The second Zodiac killings happened about 6 months later in July of 1969. So this attack happened on July 4th when 22-year-old Darlene Farron and her friend Michael Maggio, who was 19 years old, were parked in their car at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. The couple were sat in the parked car just talking, hanging out, and a second vehicle approached them and parked right beside them, and a man exited the vehicle with a flashlight and a 9mm Luger and shot both of the victims multiple times before walking away, and then he returned after seeing Michael struggling in the back. Realizing that he was still alive, he returned and shot them again. But surprisingly, Michael actually survived. He was able to describe the attacker as a 5'8" stocky man with curly brown hair. About 40 minutes later, a man called Vallejo police claiming that he was the killer, and he allegedly provided only specific details that only the killer would know. So this being the second attack, and also coupled with the fact that this was a man who was clearly willing to have the audacity to call the police after killing them and be like, hey, I killed these people, like bragging about it. That was when fears really started to set in California that there was potentially a serial killer on the loose. So a couple weeks after this murder, the local newspapers started getting letters from a man claiming to be the killer. He wrote,
"Dear editor, this is the murderer of two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, plus the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know. Christmas, brand name of ammo Super X. 2. 10 shots were fired. 3. The boy was on his back with his feet to the car. 4. The girl was on her right side, feet to the west. 4th July. 1. Girl was wearing patterned slacks. 2. The boy was also shot in the knee. 3. Brand name of ammo was Western. Here is part of a cipher. The other two parts of the cipher are being mailed to the editors of the Vallejo Times and San Francisco Examiner. I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper. And this cipher is my identity. If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Friday, 1st of August, 69, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend.
And he referred to himself as the Zodiac. He actually included a third of a cipher that the killer claimed would reveal his identity, and he demanded that the papers print his letter on the front page, or he promised more violence would follow. And honestly, this terrified the shit out of a lot of people. They actually ended up printing a lot of the Zodiac's letters as time went on. Pretty much all of the letters from the Zodiac were signed with a very ominous, specific symbol of just like a cross in a circle, and that is a similar logo to the Zodiac watches, which we'll talk about later. So of course, since this was in the newspaper, a lot of people were trying to decipher what the hell this code said, and it ended up being solved by a local high school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, who, according to them, it reads, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because a man is the most dangerous animal of all." The killer also claimed that he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. It was just weird and very cryptic, and scared the hell out of not only the police departments, but also the people, the citizens, because this man's letters were being broadcasted on the front page of the papers, and that's really scary. I can't even imagine existing in the area during this time. It would have been insane. So the Zodiac killer struck again on September 27th of 1969 when a young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were at a lakeside picnic spot in Napa County, California. The couple was approached by a man wearing a very bizarre executioner's hood with the Zodiac symbol on its chest. He claimed to have been an escaped convict and demanded the couple of their money and car keys. So after tying them up and taking their things, the Zodiac killer ended up stabbing them, and unfortunately Cecilia succumbed to her injuries, but Brian Hartnell actually lived and was able to give way more evidence about who this man could have been, which we'll talk about things that he saw a bit later. The next Zodiac murder was a man named Paul Stein, who was a cab driver in San Francisco, and he picked up the killer and drove him to an affluent neighborhood, and the killer shot him in the head, took his wallet and his car keys and a piece of his blood-stained shirt. He was actually seen by multiple witnesses, but they were children who witnessed this man exiting the cab calmly, and officers mistakenly somehow described this man as a black male, but he was actually white, so it's kind of thought that the police officers not only passed the Zodiac killer because they didn't think they were looking for a white man, but actually spoke to him. It's believed that it was the Zodiac killer who told the police that the killer went the other way, which is actually just fucking insane. Like, if you think about that, it's insane. It's kind of funny in, like, not a funny way. You know what I mean? Like, he literally was like, yeah, the killer went that way. And he was the killer? Like, that's actually crazy. A few days later, the Zodiac actually sent the piece of Paul Stein's clothes to the San Francisco Chronicle, and it was covered in blood.
This is the Zodiac speaking. I'm the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did the people in the North Bay area. The San Francisco police could have caught me last night had they searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise. The car driver should have just parked their cars and sat there quietly waiting for me to come out of cover.
The Zodiac killer's letters were a very critical part of his reign of terror. He confessed to killing multiple people, but those are the known cases that are confirmed to be the Zodiac killer. But he claims upwards of 10 to 20 different victims that he allegedly killed. On November 9th of 1969, the Zodiac killer sent a letter to the Chronicle again that really scared people because it was just creepy as hell. He basically detailed in a letter that he planned to attack school buses using bombs and wrote,
"School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out."
Literally just insane. And the idea, of course, of innocent school children obviously being targeted here caused a very mass hysteria in the community. Parents began freaking out and wanting to escort their children to school. Bus routes were altered. There was a lot of precaution taken around these claims. Like, the police were not taking these claims lightly, but at the end of the day, they still had no suspects of who this could be. Obviously, during this time, this is the 1960s and 70s, DNA evidence is nowhere near what it is, but of course things have been revisited in recent years, which we'll talk about later. But ultimately, this case was just unsolved. No one really knew what was going on. There was a couple of different theories as to who the Zodiac Killer could have been, a couple different tips. They claimed they got so many tips every single day about who the Zodiac Killer could have been, but there was only really one very important suspect that we'll talk about in a second. I want to talk about two other suspects first, though, that I think are less prominent. So one suspect of who the Zodiac Killer could have been is a man named Gary Francis Post, who was an Air Force veteran and a house painter from Groveland, California. Apparently, he had very similar forehead scars to those matching the composite sketches of the Zodiac Killer, but again, those are just forehead wrinkles. Like, I don't feel like that's like that great of a theory. So basically, the investigators of this group called the Case Breakers actually spoke out about this in 2021, claiming that they had cracked the code and this was the Zodiac Killer, which is why you might think that the Zodiac Killer is a solved mystery, but it's actually not. And personally, I don't think this guy did it. There's a couple different little pieces of evidence here. For example, apparently they could find Post's name in one of the Zodiac ciphers, but again, a lot of people claim to find a lot of different names within those ciphers, so who really knows? The Case Breakers also claimed that a partial DNA match linked Post to this case, but the law enforcement have never confirmed this to be true, and so ultimately that's kind of just a theory. But recently, though, there has been a man on TikTok who claims that the Zodiac Killer is his grandfather. And there have been a lot of people claiming that the Zodiac Killer is their dad, their grandpa, etc. But again, I still think that there is one clear suspect that we'll talk about in a second. So Jeremy Foy is this TikToker who spoke about how he believes the Zodiac Killer was his grandfather, Richard Hoffman, who was a Vallejo police officer at the time and was involved in the original Zodiac investigations. So here's all the information that Jeremy posted in his TikTok.
My grandpa is the motherfucking Zodiac Killer, and this is not clickbait, so please, I need the power of the internet to share this, bookmark it, and blow my comment section up. I want to start off by saying this is not just based off physical appearance. I typed in my grandpa's name on Google the other day, and to my fucking surprise, internet sleuths have been throwing my grandpa's name around for years, connecting him as the Zodiac motherfucking killer. As you can see here in all these pictures on the screen somewhere, that it looks exactly like my grandpa. Let's talk about it. My grandpa was a Vallejo police officer. Yes, the same area where the Zodiac killer's fucking killings took place. Let's move forward. Let's talk about the Darlene Sharon murder. Let me tell you, this is not in any order, but the more evidence I give you, you are going to be convinced that my grandpa is in fact the Zodiac Killer. Darlene Farron and her boyfriend Mike or Matt, forgot the fucking guy's name, were driving around Vallejo one night, a night that my grandfather happened to be on duty, driving an unmarked police car and wearing plain clothes. Mike, who ended up surviving the shooting, said that they were being followed around by this car all night in Vallejo before they pulled into Blue Rock Springs. They said when they parked, the car pulled in, a man hopped out of the car, and Darlene, the girl who passed away, said, "Oh my God, that's Richard. He's gonna kill us both." Apparently, she was dating a police officer in Vallejo behind her husband's back. She was apparently a thotty. Rest in peace, Darlene Farron. So this guy in her passenger seat is one of her many boyfriends. And it was well known by her friend group that she was dating a Vallejo cop, although she never told them the name. She had a painting party at her house a few weeks before her murder, and it was said that my grandfather, Richard Hoffman, showed up uninvited, and she told her circle of friends that she is scared to death of him, and he was not invited there. My grandpa denies these claims. He says he never laid eyes on her, but then later goes on to say, "I know that she worked at a restaurant locally here in Vallejo." How the fuck have you never laid eyes on her, Grandpa? You tell me about that. Let's move forward. As Mike said, right before they got shot, she said, "That's Richard. He's going to kill us both." My grandpa's name is fucking Richard Hoffman. Now let's talk about something else that I thought was really weird. In a letter that the Zodiac wrote, and my grandpa's police reports, and also this poem that I'm going to talk about later, my grandpa spells the word until wrong. He spells it wrong. He puts 2 L's at the end. Where in multiple letters of the Zodiac wrote, he also spells until with 2 L's at the motherfucking end. Well, let's talk about the Sherry Bates murder that that took place a couple years before the Darlene Ferrin murder. She was in a library doing her homework. She had just moved from Nebraska. Nebraska, why do I mention that? Because my grandpa lived in Nebraska. My mother, biological mother, was born in Nebraska. My grandpa was also in the Navy. Sherry Bates' brother was also in the Navy. This is weird, right? It's all coming together. Well, this murder took place. She was at the library studying one night. She leaves and gets shot up, where they found a poem handwritten underneath a motherfucking desk. And forensic analysis and handwriting analysis say that is the exact writings of the Zodiac. And they say that this is possibly the first killing that the Zodiac ever did. Well, this letter was initialed RH at the very bottom. RH, Richard Hoffman. Forensic analysis experts said that letter was written by the Zodiac. So why is no one connecting this to my motherfucking grandpa? Somebody tell me why. It is said that my grandpa and Darlene, the one who got shot in Blue Rock Springs, had a romantic sexual relationship behind everybody's back, behind my grandma's back. Let's talk about his character. My grandpa's character, he was known in my family to be abusive, controlling, manipulating, and also unfaithful to my grandmother. Now we're going to sit here and pretend that my grandpa didn't do this shit. They also say that the crime scene was tampered with. Why did Darlene's family get a call that she was shot before the cops even knew about it? And that call was placed by a payphone outside of Vallejo Police Department. Someone tell me that. And my grandpa was first on scene to that shooting. And later it was revealed that scene was tampered with. My grandpa showed up on scene within 5 minutes of the shooting being reported. He sent away the officers that responded with him. Who sends away responding officers on a possible double murder? And the crime scene was tampered with. It was later revealed. So you're still going to tell me my grandpa is not the Zodiac killer. What are we going to do about it? I don't fucking know. My grandpa's on vacation in a grave somewhere. But I'm convinced.
I don't know if I think it's true. I would say a lot of it is circumstantial evidence, but I do think it's definitely a possibility, and he is probably the second suspect on my list. But the number one main suspect of this case, I think by most people that you would talk to, is without a doubt Arthur Lee Allen. I think many people believe that he is the Zodiac killer, and there is a lot of evidence that proves that that's true. But there's also kind of evidence that proves that it's not true. So it's honestly all just pretty up in the air. But I would say this has the most evidence and circumstances surrounding it that I think corroborates the fact that he could be the Zodiac killer. So Arthur Lee Allen was better known as just Lee Allen. He was born on December 18th of 1933 in Honolulu, Hawaii. He served in the U.S. Navy but was dishonorably charged in 1958. He also worked as an elementary school teacher, and his career was marred by allegations of sexual miscrime, which when he was in prison, there were no Zodiac letters whatsoever. So that is definitely important to know. Haney, who's allegedly friends with Arthur Lee Allen, basically claimed that he told him in a conversation that if he was ever out desires to kill people, and he also failed a polygraph test concerning the Zodiac murders. And of course, this man is a piece of shit. Like, he's literally disgusting. And so the fact that he could be a murderer is like not that far out of reach. It's not just like a random guy. This man is a convicted child essayer. Like, he's disgusting. Not only that, but I think the most damning pieces of evidence have to do with the fact of the victims who lived. So Michael Maggio, who was attacked alongside Darlene Ferrin on July 4th of 1969, identified Arthur Lee Allen as the person who was the assailant. And he identified him out of a photo lineup of multiple different people and said, that is the person who attacked me. I mean, that's pretty damning. And then also Brian Hartnell, who survived the September 27th, 1969 attack at Lake Berryessa, also identified Arthur Lee Allen as his attacker. But really, time got the best of them there, because when that happened, Arthur Lee Allen actually ended up dying of a heart attack. And he died with a letter in his hand saying that he is not the Zodiac killer. He went to the grave claiming that he wasn't. But that's not all particularly true. That's just what we know. So something I want to talk about for sure is the Netflix This Is The Zodiac Speaking documentary that released in October of 2024. This was a very interesting perspective on Arthur Lee Allen and his character and who he was and the people who were close to him. And basically it followed this family who is known as the Seawater family, and it's a couple different siblings, and their mother was very close with Arthur Lee Allen, and she brought Arthur Lee Allen around her children multiple times. The children have fond memories of Arthur Lee Allen, but ultimately they do remember having periods of time where they just like woke up not remembering what happened prior. And allegedly Arthur Lee Allen confessed to David Seawater, who was one of the children, when he was dying, that he not only was the Zodiac killer, but he had also drugged them when they were children. And he also abused his sister, Connie Seawater. So the Seawater kids claim that essentially Arthur Lee Allen's deathbed, he was on dialysis at the time of his death, but he ended up dying of a heart attack later. But he was on dialysis, not doing well. They knew he was going to die. And allegedly the Seawater family claimed that he confessed to being the Zodiac killer. And when they would ask their mother, like, what do you know about this? Do you think that he's the Zodiac killer? Blah, blah, blah. The mom would say, you can know all of this when I die, and I'm going to leave a box for you that you'll understand everything. So once their mother passed away, the said box was just a bunch of letters between Arthur Lee Allen and the mom, and they were just very, very strange. And I have a conspiracy theory about this because Arthur Lee Allen has a couple of different discrepancies when it comes to him actually being proved to be the Zodiac killer. For one, his handwriting was not a match. However, Arthur Lee Allen was ambidextrous, and so therefore he could write with both his left and right hand. So perhaps the handwriting analysis could be not so accurate, but I do think that it's interesting. But what if the mom, Mrs. Seawater, actually helped Arthur Lee Allen in a lot of this and wrote some of the letters, which would make it so Arthur Lee Allen would never be a match for any of these letters. I don't know. It's just a theory that I have. But again, in later years, Arthur Lee Allen was never proven to be the Zodiac killer. In fact, some of the DNA found at some of the sites of the Zodiac killings did not match Arthur Lee Allen, including a letter. Like the DNA from the letter did not match him. But again, it's old DNA. It cannot be 100% proven to be true. I don't know. I still think Arthur Lee Allen has the most evidence against him by far, and if you don't believe me, just watch this damn documentary. I feel like that very much convinced me that he is the Zodiac killer. But I don't know. Ultimately, it's still unsolved, and there is a pretty big possibility that he is not the Zodiac killer because there are a lot of doubts that people have, and I do understand that. And I think it's interesting nonetheless, but I want to hear your guys' opinions on who you think could be the Zodiac killer. Do you think it's as simple as it being Arthur Lee Allen, or do you think that there was multiple people? I think that's kind of a common theory that maybe one person was the original Zodiac killer, Arthur Lee Allen, and then other people were copycats and wrote fake letters. I don't know what to think, but it is overall a very scary case, and it's very scary to me that this has not been solved, and I don't think it ever will be because ultimately the main suspects are all dead, so I don't see there being any new evidence that comes forward. But again, I feel like the victims positively identifying Arthur Lee Allen as their assailant is probably the most damning evidence that we're going to get, and I think that's the evidence that I choose to believe, regardless of some of the discrepancies, because some of those discrepancies could theoretically be explained. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this. I want to hear it, but I wanted to do an in-depth video about the Zodiac killer, talk about all the possibilities so that we could talk about it together. Let me know what you guys think, but that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up, but let me know in the comments if there's any other serial killers that you want me to cover, their cases or unsolved mysteries. Let me know. But that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and subscribe for new videos every week, and I will see you guys later. Bye.